Think about World War II tank battles. What comes to mind? Probably the mighty German Panzers, right? Early in the war, German tank crews often looked at the American M4 Sherman and thought, easy target. The initial Shermans, with their 75mm guns, struggled against the thick armor of the German Tiger and Panther tanks. This gave the Germans a dangerous sense of overconfidence. But then, everything changed. Late in the war, especially during the Battle of the Bulge, a new beast rolled onto the battlefield, the M4A3E8, nicknamed the Easy Eight. This wasn't your average Sherman. It packed a powerful, high-velocity 76mm gun that could punch through German armor. Plus, its new suspension system made it faster and more agile. Suddenly, German crews who expected an easy fight found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The Easy Eight proved that American ingenuity could turn a perceived underdog into a true predator. Thanks for watching. If you love military history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. The first taste of American steel, November 12, 1942. The ochre sands of North Africa. The air, thick with dust and the acrid scent of cordite, vibrated with the distant thunder of artillery. Lieutenant Klaus Richter, a veteran of the brutal Eastern Front, squinted through the periscope of his Panzer IV. His crew, a hardened bunch who had faced the formidable T-34s of the Soviets, felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and weariness. Just days ago, the Americans had landed. A new player in this deadly game. And the whispers through the Afrika Korps were dismissive. Amateurs, some called them. Soft from too much Coca-Cola. Today, Klaus would see for himself. His orders were clear. Probe the enemy lines, assess their strength, and report on these newcomers. Suddenly, the radio crackled. Enemy tanks, front and center. Many of them. Klaus's heart quickened. He ordered his driver to advance, the powerful Maybach engine roaring a deep, guttural challenge. Through his optics, he saw them. Boxy, somewhat ungainly vehicles painted in a drab olive green. M4 Shermans. They looked different. Not as low-slung and menacing as a T-34, nor as heavily armored as his own Panzer IV, much less the Tigers he knew were coming. But there were so many. They seemed to swarm the desert like metallic beetles, their smaller 75mm guns swinging uncertainly. Target the lead tank. Klaus commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The Panzer IV shuddered as the 7.5cm KWK-40L-48 cannon barked, spitting a shell that tore through the desert air. A flash, a plume of black smoke. The Sherman reeled, its tracks digging into the sand as it tried to turn. Another shot. This one found its mark, piercing the Sherman's side armor. A secondary explosion. Then flames erupted from its turret, painting a grim tableau against the North African sky. Klaus felt a grim satisfaction. These Americans, with their numbers, certainly presented a challenge. But their tanks, they seemed, at first glance, surprisingly vulnerable. His crew exchanged glances. A fleeting moment of relief, mixed with disdain for the adversary's supposedly inferior machines. They had faced worse. They believed. Much worse. This, they thought, would be a manageable fight. The legend of the unstoppable American war machine had not yet begun to write itself. The myth of American inferiority takes hold. The early engagements in North Africa, and later in Sicily and Italy, seemed to solidify this perception. News filtered back to Germany, carried by battle-hardened veterans and propaganda alike. It said the American M4 Sherman was a lightweight, easily outmatched by the superior German Panther and Tiger tanks. Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Neff, commanding a company of Panthers during the brutal fighting for the Gothic Line in Italy, often recounted tales of Shermans brewing up with alarming regularity. Their armor, he'd grumble over a shared schnapps, is like butter. 7.5cm KWK-42L, 70 gun slices through it, as if it were nothing. This sentiment wasn't just bravado, it was often rooted in harsh reality. The early Sherman variants, armed with a 75mm gun, struggled to penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther or Tiger at range. Meanwhile, a well-aimed shot from a German 7.5 centimeters or 8.8 centimeters could often disable a Sherman with ease. The American doctrine emphasized quantity, speed, and maneuverability. But against the formidable German heavy tanks, this often translated into disproportionate losses. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. For the Germans, it fostered a dangerous overconfidence. They saw the Sherman as a nuisance, a vehicle to be dealt with, rather than a true threat. For the American tankers, it bred a grim fatalism. They knew their Shermans were often outgunned and outarmored. Stories circulated of Sherman crews welding on extra steel plates, sandbags, or even concrete. A desperate attempt to gain even a marginal advantage, often to little avail. The Ronson nickname, a cruel jest, referring to the Sherman's perceived tendency to ignite easily, haunted the crews. It wasn't entirely fair. Gasoline engines were indeed more prone to catastrophic fires than diesel, and internal ammunition stores could be vulnerable, but the moniker stuck, amplifying the feeling of being in an inferior machine. This wasn't to say the Sherman was a bad tank. It was reliable, relatively fast, and mechanically sound, capable of incredible feats when properly utilized. But in a direct slugging match against a Panther or a Tiger, it often came off second best. The myth of American technical inferiority, at least in tank design, began to calcify, influencing strategy, morale, and the very way battles were fought. Little did anyone realize, however, that the ingenuity of American industry, often underestimated by their adversaries, was already working on a response that would fundamentally alter the equation. Section 3. The forge of American industry. Little did anyone realize, however, that the ingenuity of American industry, often underestimated by their adversaries, was already working on a response that would fundamentally alter the equation. While German commanders and tank crews celebrated their apparent technical superiority, often dismissing American industrial output as merely a flood of unremarkable machines. Across the Atlantic, the mighty factories of Detroit, Flint, and Pittsburgh were humming with an unparalleled intensity. This wasn't just about churning out more Shermans. It was about relentless iteration, adaptation, and an almost feverish drive for improvement. The lessons learned, often at a terrible cost, from the sands of North Africa, the hedgerows of Normandy, and the mountains of Italy, were not falling on deaf ears. Engineers, factory workers, and ordnance experts pored over battle reports, dissecting every Sherman casualty, analyzing every penetration, scrutinizing every deficiency. The sheer scale of American production was already mind-boggling to the resource-starved Axis powers. While Germany struggled to produce a few hundred complex Panther and Tiger tanks each month, often facing relentless Allied bombing campaigns that crippled their infrastructure, American factories were rolling out thousands of Shermans. But it wasn't just quantity, it was the capacity for rapid evolution. Different variants were constantly being developed and introduced. Shermans with improved armor, Shermans with wet ammunition stowage to reduce the risk of catastrophic fires, and, critically, Shermans with increasingly powerful weaponry. The most significant of these upgrades was the development of the 76mm M1 gun. It was a longer, higher velocity cannon, designed specifically to address the Sherman's inability to reliably penetrate the frontal armor of Germany's latest tanks. This wasn't an easy integration. It required modifications to the turret and internal layout. But the urgency of the battlefield dictated the pace. In dimly lit workshops and bustling proving grounds across the United States, prototypes were tested, flaws were identified, and solutions were engineered with astonishing speed. The emphasis was always on getting improvements into the field as quickly as possible, even if it meant sacrificing some theoretical perfection. This was the American way of war, pragmatic, adaptable, and driven by an industrial base unlike anything the world had ever seen. The arsenal of democracy wasn't just a slogan, it was a living, breathing, evolving entity, constantly refining its tools of war. The Germans, with their meticulous but often slower design processes, and their reliance on handcrafted, complex machines, failed to grasp the true power of this industrial might. believing their technological edge would remain unassailable. They were about to learn a harsh lesson. American industry, once underestimated, was about to unleash a new breed of Sherman, one that would force a terrifying recalculation on the battlefield. Section 4. The arrival of the Easy Eight. They were about to learn a harsh lesson. American industry, once underestimated, was about to unleash a new breed of Sherman, one that would force a terrifying recalculation on the battlefield. By late 1944, as the brutal winter winds began to sweep across the devastated landscapes of Western Europe, a new variant of the Sherman began to arrive at the front lines in significant numbers. It was the M4A3E8, though to the men who crewed them, it quickly earned a more affectionate, albeit slightly ironic, moniker, the Easy Eight. This wasn't merely another incremental upgrade. It was a comprehensive overhaul that addressed many of the Sherman's most glaring deficiencies, transforming it into a much more capable and formidable fighting machine. The most noticeable improvement was the aforementioned 76mm M1 gun, now a standard feature. Its longer barrel and higher muzzle velocity meant that for the first time, a Sherman could reliably challenge the frontal armor of a Panther at combat ranges, and even pose a significant threat to a Tiger's weaker points. This alone was a massive psychological boost for the American crews, who no longer felt like they were bringing a knife to a gunfight. But the Easy Eight offered more than just firepower. It featured a new horizontal volute spring suspension HVSS system, which gave the tank a much smoother ride over rough terrain, increasing crew comfort and, crucially, allowing for faster cross-country speeds and improved gun stabilization while moving. This meant the Easy Eight could keep pace with infantry and other armored vehicles more effectively, and potentially even fire with greater accuracy on the move. The wider tracks, a direct consequence of the HVSS system, also significantly reduced ground pressure, improving the tank's mobility in mud, snow, and soft ground conditions that would become notoriously prevalent in the upcoming winter campaigns. Internally, the M4A3E8 was typically powered by the 4G AAV8 engine, a potent gasoline engine that offered excellent power-to-weight ratio and reliability. This combination of enhanced firepower, improved mobility, and better crew ergonomics made the Easy Eight a vastly different beast from its earlier cousins. It still bore the familiar silhouette of a Sherman, perhaps leading some German reconnaissance to dismiss it initially. But beneath that familiar exterior lay a profoundly more dangerous adversary. These tanks, arriving in the thousands, were about to reshape the battlefield, challenging the deeply ingrained German belief in their own armored supremacy. The stage was set for a rude awakening, one that would unfold in the desperate, frozen crucible of the Ardennes offensive, a desperate gamble. The stage was set for a rude awakening, one that would unfold in the desperate frozen crucible of the Ardennes. December 16, 1944, a biting, merciless wind howled through the dense forests of the Ardennes, carrying with it the first flurries of snow. Under the cloak of a pre-dawn darkness and thick fog, a massive German offensive, Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West, was unleashed. Operation Watch on the Rhine, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, caught the unsuspecting Allied forces completely off guard. The German spearhead consisted of their most formidable armored divisions: the veteran Panzer Lehr, the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, and the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler-Jugend, bristling with Tigers, Panthers, and the newly produced King Tigers. Their objective, to smash through the thinly held American lines, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and split the Allied forces. For many German tank crews, this offensive felt like a final, glorious push. They were confident in their superior armor, their heavier guns, and their battle-hardened experience. Oberfeldwebel Max Brandt, a tank commander in the 2nd Panzer Division, had seen enough Shermans brew up in Normandy to hold a healthy contempt for them. "They will melt before our Panzers," he declared to his crew, polishing the barrel of his Panther's 7.5 cm KWK 42L 70 gun with a greasy rag. The initial days of the offensive seemed to confirm their expectations. American units, disorganized and often isolated by the sudden, brutal assault, fell back, leaving behind wrecked vehicles and stunned infantry. The roads became clogged with retreating convoys, easy prey for the advancing German armor. The weather, initially a blessing for the Germans by grounding Allied air superiority, quickly turned into a cruel adversary for both sides. Snow piled high, ice coated the roads, and the brutal cold gnawed at men and machines alike. Fuel became a critical issue for the rapidly advancing German columns, their heavy tanks guzzling precious petrol at an alarming rate. Yet, despite the logistical nightmares, the initial momentum was undeniable. Max Brandt and his comrades pushed deeper into the American lines, encountering pockets of stubborn resistance. But nothing that their Panthers couldn't eventually overcome. They saw the familiar Shermans, often bogged down in the snow, or burning fiercely by the roadside. The perceived superiority of German armor seemed, for a fleeting, desperate moment, to be reasserted. But unbeknownst to them, the Easy Eights were already deploying, rolling into defensive positions, their wider tracks giving them a surprising advantage in the deep snow. Their powerful new guns ready to deliver a shock that would shatter German illusions and turn the tide of their last great offensive. The stage was set for a clash of armored titans, where the myth of American inferiority would finally be put to the ultimate test. The unnerving encounters. The stage was set for a clash of armored titans, where the myth of American inferiority would finally be put to the ultimate test. It was Christmas Eve, 1944. The snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the Ardennes in a pristine, yet deadly, white. The air was frigid, the only warmth coming from the desperate fires of besieged American positions or the smoldering wrecks of vehicles. Oberfeldwebel Max Brandt, his face grimed with soot and exhaustion, urged his Panther forward towards the village of Celles, near Foy. His fuel gauges were dangerously low, and the resistance from the American paratroopers in Bastogne had been unexpectedly fierce. But now, intelligence suggested a breakthrough was possible, a chance to regain momentum. As his company pressed on, a chilling report crackled over the radio. Contact, enemy tanks ahead. Not the usual Shermans, these are different. Max felt a prickle of unease. He had dismissed the vague rumors of improved American tanks as Allied propaganda. Surely, they couldn't have fixed their weak designs so quickly. He peered through his periscope, the snow-laden trees giving way to a small, open field, and then he saw them. Several Shermans, their familiar silhouettes slightly altered. Their tracks seemed wider, their turrets, while still rounded, housed a noticeably longer gun barrel. These were not the Ronsons he had learned to despise. Max ordered his driver to halt and prepared his gunner. Target the lead tank. Aim for the hull. His gunner traversed the powerful 7.5 cm KWK-42, lining up the shot. The Panther fired. The roar echoed through the forest. Max watched, expecting the familiar eruption of flame. Instead, the shell struck the Sherman's frontal glacis plate and ricocheted. A shower of sparks, a deafening clang, but no penetration. Max's breath hitched. That was impossible. He'd put rounds through Shermans at far greater distances. Before he could give another order, a flash erupted from the Sherman's elongated barrel. A high-velocity round shrieked through the air, hitting Max's Panther with a sickening thud. The armor held, but the impact was violent, rattling every crewman inside. His loader shouted, "It's a 76. That's a 76 mm gun, Herr Oberfeldwebel." Another round slammed into his tank, this one glancing off the side of the turret, showering the interior with spall. Suddenly, his mighty Panther, the king of the battlefield, felt less invincible. The Easy Eights, as he would later learn they were called, were not just holding their ground. They were fighting back with an unexpected and unnerving ferocity. The myth of American armored inferiority was beginning to unravel, shot by shot, in the frozen hell of the Ardennes. Max Brandt felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, far colder than the winter air outside. The shift in confidence, a bitter pill. Max Brandt felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, far colder than the winter air outside. The engagement at Celles was not an isolated incident. Across the desperate salient of the Bulge, similar unnerving encounters were playing out. German tank commanders, who had for so long enjoyed a distinct psychological edge, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy capable of striking back with terrifying effect. The Easy 8 Shermans, often operating in concert with tank destroyers and well supported by infantry, were proving to be formidable adversaries. Their improved mobility, especially in the snow, allowed them to maneuver into flanking positions, while their high-velocity 7.6mm guns could now reliably penetrate the thinner side armor of Panthers, and with careful aim, even find weak spots on the mighty Tigers. Word spread through the German lines, initially as disbelieving rumors, then as grim reality. The Tommy Cookers and Ronsons were gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. Lieutenant Klaus Richter, now commanding a company of Jag Panzer IVs, in a desperate attempt to push through towards Bastogne, heard the reports with a growing sense of alarm. He remembered his early encounters in North Africa, the ease with which his Panzer IVs had dealt with the first Shermans. This new information was a bitter pill to swallow. The once confident pronouncements of German technological superiority began to sound hollow. Morale, already frayed by the relentless fighting, the brutal cold, and the growing realization that the offensive was faltering, took a further hit. The psychological impact was immense. For years, German tank crews had relied on their tanks' perceived invulnerability and superior firepower to dictate engagements. Now, they had to contend with the unnerving possibility of being knocked out by a Sherman. This forced a fundamental shift in tactics. Instead of confidently engaging head-on, German commanders became more cautious, seeking ambush positions, trying to lure the Easy 8s into traps where their heavier armor and more powerful guns could still gain an advantage. But even then, the element of surprise was often fleeting. The American crews, emboldened by their new capabilities, fought with a renewed ferocity, often pressing home attacks that would have been suicidal for earlier Sherman variants. The narrative of the weaker American tank was being violently rewritten in the frozen fields and shattered villages of the Ardennes, one burning Panther at a time. This wasn't just a battle for territory. It was a battle for morale, for belief, and for the very concept of armored warfare on the Western Front. And for the Germans, the tide was undeniably turning, washing away their long-held assumptions.
The price of underestimation, previous section text. And for the Germans, the tide was undeniably turning, washing away their long-held assumptions. The cost of underestimating the American industrial capacity and their relentless drive for innovation was now being paid in shattered steel and lost lives. As the Battle of the Bulge dragged into January 1945, the weather began to clear, bringing with it the terrifying return of Allied air superiority. But even before the thunder of P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs filled the skies, the Easy Eights had already inflicted significant damage to German armored formations. Commanders like General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, a brilliant tactician, began to receive increasingly grim reports from the front. His elite divisions, once seemingly unstoppable, were suffering heavy losses against what they had once considered inferior tanks. The irony was not lost on those who understood the implications. German tank production, though featuring magnificent machines like the King Tiger, was slow, complex, and constantly hampered by material shortages and incessant bombing. Each Panther or Tiger lost was almost irreplaceable. Meanwhile, American factories continued to churn out thousands of Shermans, now with a greater proportion of the more capable 76mm armed Easy 8 variants. The sheer weight of numbers, combined with their improved performance, began to tip the scales decisively. The German strategy of relying on numerically superior, but individually less capable, American tanks to brew up easily was now fundamentally flawed. Max Brandt, his Panther still limping after taking several hits, witnessed the growing desperation firsthand. His company, once a proud spearhead, was now relegated to defensive actions, desperately trying to hold ground against relentless American counterattacks. He saw Easy Eights pushing forward, their wider tracks churning through the snow, their longer guns spitting fire. He even witnessed a well-placed shot from an Easy Eight disable a Tiger II, something that would have been unthinkable just months prior. The realization was stark. The tide had truly turned. The illusion of an unassailable technological advantage had been shattered. The Easy Eight wasn't just a better Sherman. It was a symbol of American adaptability and industrial might, a force that German propaganda had woefully underestimated. The price for that underestimation was the failure of their last major offensive in the West, and with it, the dwindling hope of a German victory. The landscape was littered not just with the wrecks of German tanks, but with the remnants of a shattered myth. The aftermath and new realities. The landscape was littered not just with the wrecks of German tanks, but with the remnants of a shattered myth. As the last German resistance in the Ardennes finally crumbled in mid-January 1945, the full extent of the Easy Eight's impact and the broader Allied industrial machine became tragically clear for the Wehrmacht. The offensive had failed spectacularly, not just due to fuel shortages or the resilience of the American infantry, but because the expected crushing superiority of German armor over its American counterparts had been negated. The encounters with the M4A3E8 had been a rude awakening, forcing German tank commanders and strategists to confront a new, unwelcome reality. Post-battle analysis, often conducted amidst the bitter retreat and the crushing realization of defeat, highlighted the effectiveness of the improved Sherman. German intelligence reports, once dismissive, now contained sobering assessments of the 76 mm gun-S capabilities, and the Easy Eight Idiot Nombut improved mobility. The tank they had laughed at, mocked, and dismissed as a lighter fluid dispenser had evolved into a credible threat. This forced a complete reevaluation of tactics, placing even greater emphasis on ambush, hull-down positions, and the careful coordination of combined arms to counter the increasing effectiveness of the Allied armored formations. For the American tanker, the Easy Eight brought not just improved performance, but a massive psychological uplift. The fear of being hopelessly outmatched began to recede, replaced by a renewed confidence in their equipment. They could now, with proper tactics and teamwork, go toe-to-toe with the best Germany had to offer. This shift in morale was invaluable as the Allied armies pushed across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. The Sherman, in its Easy Eight iteration, continued to serve with distinction throughout the remainder of the war, proving its worth in a variety of roles, from infantry support to tank-on-tank engagements. It had shed its reputation as an inferior tank, earning the respect of its crews and, grudgingly, even some of its adversaries. The battle for armored supremacy had not ended with a single, decisive supertank, but with the relentless, adaptable, and ultimately overwhelming industrial might of the United States. The Easy Eight was more than just a tank. It was a testament to how quickly a nation could learn, adapt, and turn the tide of war. The legacy of adaptation. The Easy Eight was more than just a tank. It was a testament to how quickly a nation could learn, adapt, and turn the tide of war. The war in Europe ended just a few months later, in May 1945. The devastated landscape bore testament to the ferocity of the fighting, and among the countless wrecks and discarded equipment lay the rusting hulks of both German and American tanks. But the narrative of the M4A3E8, the Easy Eight, resonated far beyond the battlefields. Its story became a powerful symbol of the Allied approach to warfare, not necessarily reliant on individual technological breakthroughs as much as on rapid industrial adaptation, continuous improvement, and the sheer, overwhelming force of mass production. For the Germans, the realization of their opponent's industrial might, epitomized by the constantly evolving Sherman, cemented the understanding that the war was always a battle of attrition they could never win. Their own tanks, magnificent though they often were complex, resource-intensive, and slow to produce. Each Panther or Tiger was almost a work of art, but art does not win a war of machines when facing a factory that can produce thousands of capable, continuously improved vehicles. The Easy Eight demonstrated that good enough in overwhelming numbers, with the capacity for swift upgrades, could often outperform perfect in limited quantities. The M4A3E8 continued its service well beyond World War II, seeing action in the Korean War and with numerous other nations, a testament to its robust design and adaptability. It had started as a tank that faced derision and was often outmatched, but through continuous refinement and the ingenuity of American industry, it transformed into a formidable weapon that reshaped the armored battlefield. The initial German arrogance, their belief that the Sherman was weak, was ultimately a fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated the spirit of innovation and the sheer manufacturing power that lay behind the American war effort. The Easy Eight stands as a powerful legacy, a testament to how quickly perceptions can change in the crucible of war, and how relentless adaptation, often dismissed as merely pragmatic, can ultimately determine victory. Left third features a WW2 American soldier, mid-30s, strong jawline, short military haircut, olive drab M1943 field jacket, prominent silver star medal, M1 helmet tilted back slightly. The soldier's facial features, expression, and dramatic cinematic lighting from the right side are identical to the Channel Is profile picture for seamless branding. Right third showcases a dynamic WW2 battlefield scene with multiple American Sherman tanks advancing through atmospheric smoke and fog. P-51 Mustang fighter planes are visible in the sky overhead, and intense explosions erupt in the background. Atmospheric smoke and fog intricately connect all visual elements across the entire banner, with dramatic cinematic lighting consistent with the soldier's lighting direction, creating a cohesive and immersive visual narrative.